Greetings, everyone. This is Sam Collins, the coding and billing expert for Acupuncture and the American Acupuncture Council, but most importantly, the network. Now, people often wonder, what is the network? You know what the network is? It's a chance for you to have, as a staff member or a part of your team, me, the coding and billing expert for acupuncture, state boards, Department of Justice, insurance carriers, the World Health Organization all seek out my advice when it comes to acupuncture coding and billing. And ultimately, my main job, though, is the helping of the profession. The American Acupuncture Council decided many years ago we have professionals out here who are doing a great job, but often don't do well on the business end. We want to add something that's going to give them that. And that's what the network is designed to do. When it comes down to it, remember, as an acupuncturist, you're ultimately a business. Have you ever really done the business side of your profession? Like, by example, everyone starts off with an acupuncture deciding, what should I charge? So, one of the most common things I'll do at the beginning with any acupuncturist is to make them understand the value of services and what they're charging. Now, for most acupuncturists, they go, okay, well, I'm going to charge this amount per visit. That's great, but are you itemizing what you're doing? Certainly, a 15-minute visit should be different from a 30-minute or 45-minute visit. So, one of the things we do is to go through to make sure that are you valuing the service? How many sets of acupuncture you're doing? How many services are you providing? Whether there's an exam done to understand that, because what we often find is acupuncturists very well undervalue their services. The simplest way to put it is I had an office that was billing out acupuncture at a rate that was about 25% below what they could be collecting. And so when I immediately changed that, they were first like, well, I don't know, Sam. I don't know if I want to charge this. I'm like, this is the going rate. It's like if you have a house that's worth 500,000, what can you sell it for? 500,000. Now you could sell it for 300,000. Well, that's what we do. We make sure you understand the true value, what's called relative value, based upon not just the national averages, but specific to your area, your zip code. Have you actually ever done that? One of the things we require actually for every member that joins the network is we have a one-on-one meeting where we go through what are you charging and why you're charging it and whether or not it should be any different or why it may be different. But beyond that, you may think, well, I mostly want to do cash. Well, that's fine too. Have you ever really looked at how do I combine a cash and an insurance practice? Can that be done? And the answer is yes, but understanding how it's done properly. Because at the end of the day, think of it, what is a person coming to you for is to get help and feel better. But what's the barrier is money. So one of the things we do with the network is really get you to understand, how do I set up my fees? What is the value of a service? The simplest way I'll put it is I see acupuncturists generally bill about 8 or 9 codes on a regular basis. Acupuncture, of course, exams, and a few therapies, heat, maybe massage. What I find is usually half, sometimes 2/3 of the codes they bill, they have undervalued. So, by example, if you're billing out 50 for a service, but the insurance is willing to pay 75, how much are you going to get paid? 50. Well, I would suggest maybe we want to be aware of what it's actually worth. Because often what you're basing it on is what you think. And obviously, what you think probably has no basis because you've never really gone through that. Have you ever had a chance to go through, like, what are the average fees for my zip code? We actually do that with you to set up a fair fee schedule. And I'm not saying I make you charge more, but I make sure that your fee, you're going to go, there's a reason I charge it. I'm not just guessing. And it's often open the door. I want you to think of where you're going to get patients from. Can you do cash with insurance? Often acupuncture offices are often lost because they think, well, if I take insurance, then I have to take everything. One of the things I will always work with an office, and this was an office that I helped, they go, Sam, I don't want to take any insurance. Well, what I taught them was there was a particular plan for them through Aetna that paid really, really well. And I said, why wouldn't you take that one? I said, that plan basically has a $100 deductible. It's going to pay you a little over 100 a visit. Why wouldn't you accept? They go, I'm afraid. Well, I would take it. So here's my point. I can take one insurance. Let's say I decide I'm going to accept Aetna, but I'm not going to take Cigna. Is that acceptable? It is. So this example was an office that they were near a Costco store. And if you're not familiar, Costco has some pretty generous benefits for acupuncture, and it's generally through Aetna. Does it pay well? It does. So all of a sudden they go, well, I started seeing them and I'm getting 100 a visit. All of a sudden their practice changed because guess how people come to the doctor? When they can afford it. So if you have insurance that covers it, are you more likely to come in? So it's opening the door. In other words, I'm saying to you, don't be afraid to learn and understand what insurances are you going to cherry pick. Do you have to accept them all? Like, should I accept Aetna or Cigna? And if I do, what are those parameters? Because you don't have to accept them. The only time that you have to accept it as insurance is when you belong to one. So I had an office that belonged to ASH. And within that, they were dealing with Cigna and Aetna. And so I had a discussion with them. And I said, well, why did you join? And they said, well, because I heard that I couldn't see them if I was out of network. And that, of course, was erroneous information. So I said, here's what I'm going to suggest to you. So I have them drop out of Cigna and Aetna. Now, they did remain in for the HMOs. They remained in for a company called Kaiser, which is a big HMO, and another one, HealthNet. But they dropped out of the PPOs. As a consequence, they went from getting, and you're going to think this sounds crazy, they went from getting $55 from Cigna to 90 to 115 per visit simply by being out of network. Because as crazy as it sounds, there are some plans when you're out of network, you actually get paid more. And don't guess at that. Imagine you're thinking, I've never heard that before. Well, you've never had this type of information. That's what the network is designed to do. It's meant for you in your area, what you're dealing with, what type of plans. Is it good or bad? Have you ever gone through, well, what plans are in my area? What's good to join or bad to join? What are the benefits? And sometimes they may not be all good, but there's enough good that it could be worth it. But that also comes to, have you ever learned what is covered? By example, there's a list of codes that are covered by insurance or certain insurances and not by others. Are you aware of it? One of the things as a network provider, you're going to get access to all of that to know here are the codes I can bill for Aetna and be paid, but here's the ones that are for Cigna. And there's some that are the same, but there's some that are different. And we also want you to be careful of, and I'll give an example. I had an office that joined because they go, Sam, I'm continuously being denied for my claims. And they go, I don't know why, I'm just not getting paid anymore. What they started doing and what they weren't aware of is they were billing codes that weren't covered. Now, let me preface that. They were billing codes that were covered, but were also billing codes that weren't covered. And I'll give an example. If you're billing Aetna or Cigna and you're billing the codes they cover, oh, they'll pay you. But if you add one code that's not on their list, they will deny it. So it's got to be understanding of the value there. Like, okay, if I'm coding insomnia, is that going to cause a denial? And that's what this office was doing. They were coding insomnia and sometimes fertility as well. Those insurances don't cover it. Now, what I will tell you is those often are complications or comorbidities. So therefore, let's say a person comes in, they have headaches and neck pain, and they're also having difficulty sleeping. I get it. We're going to diagnose the headaches and the neck pain. The complicating factor is they're not sleeping well. I'm not treating insomnia directly because if I make the neck pain and headaches go away, they're going to sleep better. So it's thinking in those ways. So it's often just understanding what you're providing. At the same token, there's some plans that do cover things like insomnia. They'll cover fatigue. There are some plans that will cover any diagnosis. You could come in with a person with fertility issues, but do you know which plans those are? Have you ever understood that? And I think that's probably the most difficulty for all is learning what plans pay or don't pay. What 7 states mandate acupuncture benefits, which don't. Which ones allow certain services? By example, can I do therapies? Some states very generous, some a little bit less. Know your state. I will tell you though, it's about understanding your patients. When a patient comes in, they're going to make a decision on care. Number one, can you help them? Number two, can I afford it? So have you ever thought about how do I set myself up to really integrate a practice with cash and insurance? Are they mutually exclusive? And the truth is they're not. But what are the nuances of cash discounts? What can you do in California or Minnesota that you can't do in Nevada or New York? Or what things you can do for a prepaid plan? You've all seen the company Modern Acupuncture. Have you ever really thought of how they make that model work and could I incorporate it? So I give an example. I had an office that was struggling. They didn't want to take any insurance, but they were telling me, Sam, I'm running into problems. I'm recommending for patients, they sometimes need 8, 10, 12 visits. But they found that patients after 2 to 4 visits felt pretty good. I won't say fully well, but good enough. So if I'm paying you 100 plus a visit and my headache is 90% gone, or it's gone and maybe it's going to come back, I'm less likely to come in. So they began, I said, well, why don't we start setting up patients that have an opportunity to get a little bit bigger discount with a prepaid plan? So they started setting up prepaid plans. These prepaid plans were anywhere from $500 to $1,200. And it was just based on the number of visits a patient got. And what they found was when a patient bought a prepaid plan, they were committed to the service and came in for the 10 or 20 visits, whatever it was. But the better beauty of it was those patients understood the value. And in doing so, they created a much better protocol to see them because even though they felt much better after 5, they knew they were going to finish because the visits were already on the books. So let's take this office, and I'll give you this. This is a direct example. This office went from no prepaid plans to selling about 20 per month. Let's do the math. If the prepaid plans are $500 to $1,200 and you're selling 10 to 20 per month, that's $5,000 to $12,000 of people coming in. Now you're going to think, well, how do I do that in my state? Well, each state can have a little bit of nuance, but that's what we do with the network. Know the differences. Like if you're on Montana or Florida, you have to put money in a trust account. Other states, you may not. And that's what we help you with because you're going to go, wow, that really changed. Now, this office doesn't take much insurance. They've built it on that. Now, I will tell you, they're also in the right area. Have you ever evaluated your practice? Like, where am I at? And what type of patient base am I going to see? Does my area afford more of a cash basis? And how do I make that work? Or what if I really don't want to do insurance, but I want to do a super bill? That's perfectly fine. But do you know how to format a super bill properly? So we had an office that joined the network, nothing else to learn how to format a super bill. And when he joined, he went from patients being frustrated when they took the super bill and never being paid to always being paid because it was formatting what was required. It's not just a simple receipt. It's a little more than that. We want to make sure you have it. As a network member, you have access to it, and it updates a little bit every year because if you're not aware, codes change a little bit. So we want to make sure it's always the most up to date. The other thing the network does, though, is we've talked about fees a lot. Have you ever really looked at what are my fees based on my area? And do they update? We complain you don't get raises, but do you ever look at, have you ever raised your fees or what's the algorithm for that? We simply use Medicare as a basis for that. Have you ever looked at what are the Medicare rates? What should that be? And should there be a percentage above it? There should be. And it should be consistent because what we often find is an office is billing out that 5 or 6 codes, as I mentioned, and half are wrong. If you simply increase it, it's going to increase the value of your service because you're getting paid what it's really worth, not just, oh, I thought it was supposed to be cheap. Keep in mind, one of the things we go through is if you're going to do cash discounts, let's do it with a reasoning. Will that increase the number of patients? Will they be more compliant? Or are you just lowering a fee so that people will pay less? Think of it in these terms. When a patient comes to you, what are they really looking for? Is to be helped. Now, the fee has to be fair, but has any one of you ever chosen a doctor because it was cheap? Have you ever really thought of what is the value of my service? There's so much guesswork that goes on in this profession. I want to change that. Like, what if I want to say I just charge so much for an hour? Well, you could, but I probably want to itemize what I do. Now, a lot of acupuncturists are afraid to take insurance because they think I'm going to be audited. I'm going to get in trouble. The truth is, there isn't that many audits, but I want to make sure, even if you're thinking you might, just be compliant. One of the things we do with the network is to really create a level of compliance. If we have you understanding the codes, the documentation, the values, it's going to go out properly and have less chance of being audited because it all makes sense. It's fair, it's reasonable. Like, by example, how many services should I provide on a visit? What will put me in a position where it's too high? What if I bill certain exam codes that are very high? Can I document them? One of the things we do with the network is to go through your file. So I'll give an example, and this is going to sound crazy, but this is really true. We had an office that received an audit request When they got it, they said, we've determined that we feel your services were overcharged and we overpaid you. And they requested back, this is going to sound crazy again, close to $1 million. It was just under like 995,000. Now, the first thing when you hear that, you're going to think, oh my God. The first thing I thought when that did, I thought you should teach a seminar on how to get patients, because in order for someone to ask for that much money back, how much did you have to provide and do? So we looked at it and said, okay, let's see what they're saying. One of the things they said is that this office was billing out for more time in a day than they could provide services. Now, the reality is, obviously, you can't do more than a 1 hour service in 1 hour. That's certainly true. But realize that, could I treat people and not have to just be with one patient? Could I move from room to room? Absolutely. If you're not familiar, there is also something called the 8-minute rule. That 8-minute rule doesn't mean you have to spend a full 30 minutes to bill two. It could be as little as 23. So it was looking at all those parameters. And part of it was because the insurance company said, your office says you're open from 9 to 6 p.m. So within that time, you can only treat for 9 hours. Well, there was actually an hour lunch break, which we didn't bring up. But we said, well, that's true. However, just because you say you start at 9, does that mean you never have a patient that makes an earlier appointment? Which sometimes happens. But here's the biggest thing we found. If you close at 6, that doesn't mean you stop treating. That might be your last appointment time. You might treat for an additional hour. So it came out, none of that turned out. Doctor paid nothing back. They said they're going to be a network member forever because we made sure that we protected them with that. So we go through with you as a network member how to document. Acupuncturists often have learned very little on proper documentation through school. You become a great acupuncturist, but your understanding of documentation, we make sure you have a template and format to do it. It's not hard. There's just certain parameters you must have. So what I do with every office is I audit you first. As a member, I want to see files. I'm going to look and see, hey, if you build out 3 sets, was 3 sets documented? If you're billing an E&M service, that's a 99204. I'm going to say, fine. Do you have the severity or do you have the time there to back it up? If you have a therapy, how are you documenting that therapy? By example, if you say I'm doing Tuina, that's fine, but you better describe it more as how you're doing the massage, because Tuina doesn't have an English version, if you will. So I want to make sure that it's there, that someone can clearly say, oh, this was done. It's certainly not unreasonable to do multiple services, but we have to make sure where they document it properly. None of that is hard. It's just often something that you have never seen in that way. So you're often caught off guard. You're like, oh, I didn't know they required me to document time. They do. I will tell you, I think acupuncturist is a profession that spends more time with patients than most other types of providers. I think the profession generally takes pride in that. In many ways, you're what doctors used to be. I want to be sure as a network member, how am I documenting that time? Because there's a value to it, whether it's going to be evaluation management, a therapy, or acupuncture. And speaking of therapies, have you ever thought of what are these therapies? What are they really? Because if you read the definition, it says therapeutic exercise. What does that mean? Could that fit Qigong? Does it fit with traditional exercise only? What about yoga? What about Tai Chi? How about what's the difference of a therapeutic activity, 97530? Or how do I properly document cupping? Is there a code I can use? What about moxibustion? What about laser that could be within scope? What about injections? For many states, you can do injections. How do I make sure we have that? We're going to always be that resource. I had an office that had difficulty understanding the codes for injections and unfortunately was way undercharging. They were literally charging a quarter of the value. What we did was to look at the values of those codes. We changed it, and they said instantly, Sam, I got a 300% increase in my revenue simply because I understood the value. That was with injections, but it could be anything. Keep in mind that your office is good because of you. You're a good acupuncturist. But are you really that business person and that one that works behind the scenes? That's what I want to be for the network. I am your member for that. I'm your expert to say, let's look at it. One of the things we're going to do is to make you go through and send me some files to review. Are they compliant? Because what we have found is often we find they're not compliant. But when we make corrections to them and they become compliant, any post audit, so long as you show them the compliance, it goes away. So be careful of the hyperbole. If you have the right resources behind you, it's never going to be a problem. And that comes to everything, whether should I join or not join an HMO or PPO? Have you really gone through it? What does it pay? Have you really looked? Or have you ever created that spreadsheet? We go through and we give you a template for it for all the insurances you build. One thing that's mostly confusing to many, you think, oh, I don't want to do it because it's too confusing. There's too many. The reality is most of you are going to do somewhere around 5 to 8 insurance companies on a regular basis. What I want is a spreadsheet that we go through and say, okay, here's those plans. Here's what they allow, what diagnosis they do allow or don't allow. And you can go through your list. Oh, good. If I have this one, this is what they're going to cover. This is what we're going to pay. So when a patient comes in, they know exactly. Because remember, people with insurance go to the doctor more. Here's a question you ask yourself. If you're doing an all cash practice, nothing wrong with that if you're in the right area. But the reality is, how many of you go to the doctor and pay cash? So my question to you is, most of you don't. So how do you expect patients to come to you? Well, part of that is offering a value to what you do. But I would say it's not that I want to say I don't take cash. I just want to be careful that you're not turning away good insurances. How many of you have ever looked at whether or not is it reasonable to join the VA? I helped an office join the VA a few years ago. Now that's 90% of their practice. They've hired 4 of their acupuncturists in their office to comply. Frankly, they're making money hand over fist. I had another office that said, you know what? I think I want to do prepay plans. We helped them with that. They made changes. They all of a sudden had an increase in revenue. Because think of it, when people come in, what's the number one question? What's the cost? Have you ever really set up that algorithm in your office to be able to tell them properly? Do you have the right financial agreement? We provide you with financial agreements for everything. What about what insurances are good? Can I take a Medicare Advantage plan? Here's an office that said, oh, Sam, Medicare only is if you have a medical doctor. Well, that's true for Medicare Part B. But I had an office, this is in Florida, so heavy retirement community. And I said to them, I said, well, why aren't you taking Medicare Advantage plans? They go, well, I'm not part of Medicare. You don't have to be. This Medicare Advantage plan actually has something called routine acupuncture. This office went from seeing no one to seeing about 30 people a week, which is pretty full office for Medicare Advantage. This Medicare Advantage plan pays not just for acupuncture, exams and therapies. Right now, that's almost all they do. They go, Sam, I don't even have room for cash patients anymore because so many of these are coming in. It's generally guaranteed a little over 100 a visit. Again, understanding that aspect, though, have you really set up your office for that? We're going to be your resource. What the network is intended to do is that you have someone on your side that helps you understand your practice parameters. By example, one of the first things we do with a meeting besides fee schedules is, do patients know what you do? What have you done with your social media, if you will? Like if I went to your website and you treat fertility, does it appear anywhere? And this is a good example. If I were to type in what you treat, acupuncture for back pain, and I'm in your area, would your name come up? We help you with understanding what you need to put on your website to make sure people can see, oh, I didn't know you treated that. I mean, ask the average person, what does an acupuncturist do? You're going to hear a lot of ignorant answers. We make sure you start to put things that are specific to you and what you do so that people can find you. What I've learned, people love acupuncture once they've received it. But have you set yourself up to make sure people know there's access with you? With the network, we're here to open all those doors. It's not about insurance. It's about all parts of your practice, the compliance for coding, billing, documentation, medical necessity. What happens if I get a personal injury? Here's a good example. I had an office that would never accept personal injury. And I thought, why wouldn't you? In most states, patients can come to you. This office went from seeing no personal injury. Now, I'm not saying they're seeing a ton, but they see about 3 per month. If you're not familiar, personal injury, what I'm referring to is auto accidents. So this office had none. Once they started treating and they started getting some referrals from attorneys who like them, they're seeing on average 3 per month. The typical bill of an acupuncturist in a personal injury case, not talking fender benders, but a significant injury, is $3,000 to $5,000. Let's do the math here. That's $10,000 to $15,000 a month just on that alone. So have you ever thought of, how do I get even one of those patients per month? You want to give yourself a, say, $10,000 to $15,000 raise? Open the door and let people know you treat personal injury. Are you just allowing them to go anywhere? If they're already seeing you, would they be more likely to come in? Are you doing anything to cultivate that? If you're taking VA patients, we help you with making sure you set up, do I have the right signage? Do I understand that? It's about compliance, but at the end of the day, it's about your practice. I know what you do, but do your patients or potential patients? Allow us to help you with that from all aspects, from having the patient come in all the way through the billing. Like if you get a denial, we're going to help you with that. Hey, Sam, I got a claim back and it says something's improper. Well, you probably formatted something wrong. Unfortunately, acupuncturists are so new to it, they often have trouble understanding it. Or do I have to do an electronic claim? Can I do a paper claim? How do I get a denial from Medicare? So I had someone that had a supplemental plan, or I should say a secondary plan from Medicare. And they said, well, I need a denial from Medicare and I can't get it. What we taught them was you can get it, but you have to use a specific form called a patient request for payment, or 1490S. Once we use that, they got the denial. That secondary plan started paying. And the beauty of it was, is I was able to teach them that one denial will work for every visit of that patient. You have to do it over and over, because secondary plans often do have very generous acupuncture benefits. By example, what states do mandate acupuncture? What insurances are better? My rule is the network helps you stop guessing and start doing it the way that you can appreciate it, and you can do your work. Allow us to be that backbone. So at the first of the year, when things update, we're your resource. When you need a form, we're your resource. When you need something that you're disputing, we're your resource. What do you do if an insurance is requesting money back? I had an office that the insurance company was requesting because they paid them about $80,000 in benefits, and they're requesting it back because it turned out the policy they were billing supposedly had acupuncture, but then later it didn't. There's case law. And so I was able to bring up that case law that they cannot force you to pay it back. That office instantly retained their 80,000 to pay it back, and they assumed they're in big trouble. They didn't know what they were going to do. We're the place that's what we do for you. Have your own expert on hand. Make me part of your team. Think of what you're going to pay for a year. That's literally cents per day, and it includes seminars, CE. In addition to that, though, it's the one-on-one where we have a problem. Give me a call. It's unlimited. The American Acupuncture Network is really your resource. And what I want you to think of, in a way, we're doing this because we support the profession. And if we support the profession in giving advice and doing continuing education, for that matter, even selling malpractice, if you're not practicing, we don't have a business. We have a very vested interest in your success. Allow us to make you more successful. We will do that. It's not uncommon for an office to join, and within the first couple of weeks, certainly within the first month, you'll make back every year the cost of the network. And that doesn't even take into account the seminars. So if you want someone on your team, join the network. I'd love to have you, and I want to be your friend.